Are you truly stepping into the role of leader in your own life the way you know you're meant to? What shifts would unlock your full potential? It's time to explore those answers with the host of Sacred Leadership, intuitive business coach Sherisse Alexander.
Welcome everyone to Sacred Leadership with Sherisse. My name is Sherisse Alexander, your host here on Inspired Choices Network, where today we are talking about finding internal alignment in a dynamic environment as a leader. I know it's a mouthful. And I, Sherisse Alexander, am joined by Olubiyi Akinnaanu. Oh, B, I'm going to totally butcher it. I'm sorry. Can you say your last name?
It's a Kinanu, and I think you're on the
Akinnaanu.
path
I
to
was
get that
on
right.
I was going there and then I just got in my head. All good because I just call you B. But today I am joined by B, where we'll be exploring how B specifically goes about finding alignment between internal core values and organizational objectives as a leader. In the world of business, this is often a question, the quest for bottom line versus staying in alignment with values that don't sacrifice the collective good. Each week, what I try to do is bridge the gap between leadership and the sacred, and is there a place for the two to coexist in a business environment? A little bit about B. B is a corporate finance and investment professional with over 10 years of experience across debt and equity capital raising, from private equity to venture capital and impact investors, all things money. B is your guy. He currently serves as a senior advisor, corporate finance at Watt Renewables, a climate infrastructure developer focused around sub Saharan Africa. Previously, he was vice president of corporate finance at RenSource Energy, where he was instrumental to over 70 million in equity and debt capital raises. B, you've done a lot. Is there anything that I haven't said about you?
I think the one thing I'll add to that is that I have a certain passion for education on the African continent. And so I've also done some work around that with channeling capital into tertiary education, really higher education on the continent.
Awesome. And you and I have definitely had conversations around education
Extensive ones. Yeah.
that have been really passionate. I think we were both passionate, but on the same side. So it wasn't contentious or anything. So, with today's topic, where we're talking about internal alignment with the work that we do externally, I'm going to dive right in because there's a lot that I want to cover with you today. But if you're open to sharing it, what have you identified? Like, I think sometimes we think our values can change, but at this point in your career, have you identified what your core non negotiable values are?
Yes, and it's an interesting question in two ways. One is that just speaking about personal values, I would say when I think about my career, and how I've evolved within an organizational context and even how I've grown up, the places I've been through, certainly right, the values have evolved, they've matured is the way I would describe it, not necessarily changed. And I recall what my core values at the start of my career used to be, and just around life. One of the earlier quotes that I had guided how I thought about the things that I wanted to work on, and the things that I did, and how I interacted with other people was from Mahatma Gandhi. And he
Mm,
said that, and the context in which he was saying this, right, it was that the problem is that you think you have time. And
mm,
I recall to have, read that quote as early as 14 or 15 years old, when I was about getting into the university. And, I
mhm,
was young, I was, just going through the ranks, got into high school, got into university the following year when I was done with high school. And that quote just resonated with me that, and in my professional life, what that translated to is urgency
mhm,
in everything that I do, because there's just so much work to be done that you should not come to a point where you think that you have a lot of time to get all the things that you need to get done. And that underpins how I think about the rest of my core values, that I shouldn't at any point in time think, that, I have a lot of time. So once I got that right, it sets every other thing in perspective. That having a bias for action and moving things forward was very important. But overall, I premise my corporate life and even the way I live personally around three things or three values, so to speak. One is friendship, integrity, and professionalism. Those are the core values that I take to be important to me, in addition to this underlining pillar, which is having a sense of urgency in what it is that I do and the causes that I'm passionate to, both in the short, medium, and the long term.
I love that you brought up time because I feel the same way about time. In fact, today I was saying to somebody that some people maybe might consider me to be slightly lazy because I'm always trying to figure out a way to do it faster. Right. And I said, so it could be, so anything that we might be working on, I'm always figuring out, like, okay, how can I make this faster so I can free up more time to do other things? But what I'm curious about when you bring up time in relation to friendship, integrity, and professionalism, like, how does that play out? What does that actually look like?
So, in contextualizing that, friendship as a core value, to me is being able to enjoy the work that you do in whatever
Hmm.
context it is. It's about having your heart in what it is that you do. One commonality, right, in whatever project, whatever company you work with, is that you'd have to always work with people. And to be able to work with people effectively, you need to, at a fundamental level, come to a commonality around the mission or the vision of what you're trying to achieve, and whether you both can come together to work on that. What ties that in for me is urgency is that one factor that everyone can understand.
Hmm.
I could come to you and say my core value is friendship. I really want to be friends with you because I think that once our interests are aligned, we're able to get to objectives faster. But
Hmm.
underpinning that is we need to get there quick, and I may not necessarily hold you to a value of friendship, but I would hold you to a value of urgency. And so in my
Hmm.
interaction with other people, right, and in other contexts, urgency is the one thing that we can both agree on, and I don't need to sugarcoat it, or I don't need to define it in a certain type of way. But the second level, elements such as friendship, integrity, and professionalism, like I mentioned earlier on. So the how I tie it together and why urgency is important is that I'm able to use that as a tool to engage others in a way that is
Hmm.
measurable, if you will, so that there's no form of ambiguity in what it is that I'm trying to say, in the goals that we're trying to achieve together.
So I'm curious what happens when now I understand in our work that there is an urgency, but what happens when you're working with a institution and an organization where time is just a man-made concept? And there's zero urgency. Oh gosh. What do you do when that happens?
And it's especially when you operate in certain contexts. For instance, if you operate on the African continent, in emerging markets generally, you could find that to be there's this concept of African time,
I
where
think it's black people time, to be honest.
And I think what I've found though, and in the systems that I've been in the organizations that I've been in, is that urgency, right, or respect for time is a learnable skill.
Yep.
um, the more you emphasize it, right, and the more you hold it as that one thing that is sacrosanct, the more you see a lot more people coagulating at that value, at that common goal or common behavior that you want to see. And
Mm.
so I think that's what I've taken into the organizations that I've worked in, into the types of projects that I've worked on, that, urgency is what gets us to the goal, gets us there faster. And you mentioned a good point earlier on that in how you think about freeing up more time, urgency allows you to get to the goal faster, right? Because you're thinking of more creative ways to achieve the goal, whether with the lowest cost possible, in the fastest time possible. And so the differentiator that I've seen, and you just have to make this something that you bring into the situation or into to the table every time, is that encouraging everyone to learn that, and emphasizing and enforcing that where possible is an important element. And the good thing is that it's learnable.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody is born with a sense of urgency. That would just be
Yeah, that's true.
ridiculous to say. You have to learn
Yeah,
it, at some point in time.
it's true. So very true. So, just to maybe add a little bit of background for I do talk a lot about my experience in Nigeria, but I'm wondering if for the audience, you can share a little bit about your experience in Nigeria, like being born there and raised there, going to school, and now you're working there, and I'm going somewhere with this, but just for a little bit of background, because I like to call Nigeria a very dynamic environment, and I'm curious, like just if you could share a little bit more about your experience.
Yeah, there are a number of things that make Nigeria a very standout country. One is that, and there are a number of incredible things because, sometimes you hear Nigeria and you want to think that, oh, it's just a lot of bad things, that are happening in the
Hmm.
country. But the one thing that you can almost clearly, by just, waving your finger in the air and getting, is that there's incredible talent across the country, across different fields, whether it's the sports, whether it's entertainment, whether it's even more traditional sectors, the types of talent that we produce, even from our educational system, etc. And what we say is that there's so much potential in the country, but opportunity is where we see that there's not a lot of democratization across every individual that is born. So I'd say I grew up in a country that has a lot of potential, and still continues to have a lot of potential. It's a country where you have to think about a lot of things, the type
Hmm.
of education you want to get, the types of challenges that you could face when you're looking to get an education. I give a very simple example. When I was trying to go to a university, for instance, in Nigeria, one of the critical decisioning factors for me in picking a university that I eventually went to, selecting the university I went to, was a university that wouldn't go on strike. There's this thing that we call strike in Nigeria, where the union of teachers or the union of faculty members decide not to teach anymore. They decide not to work anymore because their salaries have not been paid, etc. And so, in thinking about the next level for yourself as an individual, you need to be able to make those types of decisions where the pathway to your own, success, or the pathway to the outcomes that you want to see, you have to define it carefully based on the best available options to you. Now, I mean, the expectation is that you go to the best university when you're trying to go to a university, right? But in the instance
Hmm.
where there are lots of universities who just, go out of session, and, you have schools just going on strike, and you don't have faculty coming to classes, etc., how you think about your decision tree for what elements to consider sort of changes. And that's the story of Nigeria, where a lot of the infrastructure that you need, a lot of the whether it's hard infrastructure or soft infrastructure, you have to think about it yourself to be able to get to the types of outcomes that you need. And so there's a lot of, where there is a will, there is a way, because the way will not
Hmm.
just open up to you. You have to have the will to decide that this is the path that I want for myself. And this is how I'm going to get there. And I give a last example before I hand over to you, Sherisse, is that when growing up, right, I was, a good science student. I was good in STEM, the sciences. But when I wanted to pick a career choice, for instance, right, as early as high school, I thought about going to commercial class, right? We call it
Hmm.
commercial department, where you can study accounting or business or commerce effectively. Primarily because I thought that, in a country like Nigeria at the time, if you wanted to practice, you might not necessarily, if you want to practice the sciences, you might not necessarily get the type of exposure that you needed in the types of
Hmm.
organizations or the institutions that we had. And so I made that type of call to pursue that career path as early on. And then, today, I'm in corporate finance, just continue to pursue that path. As you can imagine, the types of deals that we're even doing in Nigeria and the African continent, right? they can be comparable, and the type of work that you put in, they can be comparable to anywhere in the world. So effectively, that's the type of environment that, Nigeria is like, where you're thinking through. You have to think carefully about the options available to you and how to get to the outcomes that you need to get to. But again, the incredulity of the talent that we have just means that on a day-to-day basis, we're solving those problems.
Yes. And I want to talk more about education because I have more questions, but we are going to go to break. So when we come back, we will continue to talk more with B about finding internal alignment in a dynamic environment as a leader here on the Inspired Choices Network. Sherisse Alexander, Sacred Leadership with Sherisse. We'll be right back.
Leadership isn't reserved for CEOs or world leaders. It's something each of us is called to embody in our own lives. But how do you awaken that inner leader with clarity and confidence? On Sacred Leadership with intuitive business coach Sherisse Alexander, you'll discover powerful tools and spiritual insights to align your words, actions, and outcomes. Tune in every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, 9 Mountain, and 8 Pacific, right here on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com.
This is Sacred Leadership with Sherisse Alexander. To participate in the program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also send an email to Sherisse at pavitraleadership.com. Now back to the program.
Welcome back to Sacred Leadership with Sherisse on the Inspired Choices Network, where I am joined today by B, and we are talking about finding internal alignment in a dynamic environment as a leader. In the first segment of the show, we were just getting to know B, who has been involved in corporate finance for over 10 years at PwC and recently with Watt Renewable Corporation. In addition to that, B is extremely passionate about education, and that's actually where we left off. So what I was asking you was about the dynamics of the environment in Nigeria. And I was really trying to get more about your experience coming up. So you landed on education, and you were saying that one of the things that you really recalled from your younger years was really thinking through where did you want to go to school, which most young people would say, I think, give it a lot of thought, like where do I want to go to school, what are the objectives? But I think you were talking about it more in the context of where will my education not be interrupted by things such as labor strikes and that sort of thing. So do you think that, I don't know how many years ago university was for you, but do you think that today the youth are facing similar challenges, or do you think that they have evolved significantly? And then there are other things that they need to consider, as it pertains to education.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, I think there are two or probably three perspectives to that question. One is, the world has significantly evolved, from where it was, even for Nigeria, over the last 10 years. And today, education is somewhat different. So you have a perspective where the issues that we had to deal with at the time, like labor strikes, etc., those issues are still prevalent today. As a matter of fact, the Association of Staff Union for the universities, they've just recently started another strike.
Mm,
And they had one, about 2 years ago, that lasted maybe for like 2 years or 18 months thereabout. So those issues still continue to persist.
mm,
Flashes here and there, where the labor strikes continues. But how you can get educated, especially at undergraduate level, has fundamentally changed.
mm,
So some of the learnings that you could pick up from the internet today could effectively compete with an undergraduate education. And so
mm,
for young people today, right, the sources for learning, right, are fundamentally changed on like what was obtainable about, 10, 14, 15 years ago. And so just because of that, it means that, as a young person, you have multiple options. You don't necessarily have to rely on the institutions that exist and the challenges that come with schooling at those types of institutions. You could go on Google today, you could go on Coursera, right? You could go on, multiple learning platforms to obtain an education. There's also the prevalence of online learning, and online
mm-hmm.
education, even at the undergraduate level, that's really transformed how we learn today or how young people learn today. And so for them, that's an advantage that they can take to solve whatever infrastructure problems just come with the type of institutions or the type of terrain that we operate in. So yes, some of those issues still persist, but incredibly, the sector has grown, and there's many opportunities to learn for young people and effectively change the trajectory of their lives.
What a positive perspective, because you're right. I think that, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like ever since COVID and everybody was online, that was really the shift to online learning and really opening up like all these different avenues. I won't talk about, we won't go down that road, but my whole point being is like, even though you bring up that, yes, those labor challenges still exist, there's so many other opportunities that have equally come with it. So while, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, like you only had one option, because it certainly was not an option back in our day. But today it certainly is an option where you can, even if, an organization might not recognize whatever the education, like whatever credentials that you're getting, right? Whatever course you go through, whatever the case may be. To me, lifelong learning is so important, right? So regardless of where you get that degree or that letter or that accreditation from, there's value in that online learning or that long time learning. I'm curious because you'd said that the ASU, is that it?
The ASU, yeah.
Yeah, that they're about to go on strike again. Is that what you said?
Yes. Yes.
And the last time they were on strike for 2 years, did I hear that right?
Yes. Yes.
Oh my
Correct.
gosh, 2 years. So right now in my home province, our teachers are also on strike. And so my son, who's a teacher, I'd said to him, I said, well, what do you think the issue is? I said, do you think it's money? And he's like, no. He's like, no, I don't think it has anything to do with money. He's like, money's probably on the list of things that they want. But he said, I think it's more resources. He's like, like the
Mm,
classrooms are stretched at, 30 kids in a classroom. They don't always have an EA, an assistant, or an aide, which makes it really, really challenging. And teachers are asked to do so much more
much.
today with
Yeah.
so much less. And we can't deny that, like, there is the idea that, and I'm talking about younger kids, I'm not talking about post-secondary, but there could be the idea that I'm going to send my kid to school. School, you're responsible for raising my kid and
Mm,
give them good values and bring them home to me and make sure everything's out. So I don't want to say a lot of parents, but I think that's what teachers are getting at when they're saying, more resources. We can't do everything. We can't raise the kids and give them education and be the parents and make sure that they eat and do all of these things. And oh yes, and the extracurriculars, and the list goes on without more resources. So it's interesting to me that you're talking about a strike that's about to happen. We're having one right now. So I think I
yeah.
tip my hats to teachers. So
They're
thank you
undervalued, I think, is the way to
for
describe.
everything you do. Let me just say it very, very clearly. Um, so with that in mind, What would you say then to leaders that are, responsible then for the bucket of education? So, where I come from, it's provincial legislators. It's the province that will come to the table with teachers and negotiate whatever their collective agreement is. I'm not sure what it is here in Nigeria, but what would you say to leaders that are trying to prevent strikes or, trying to bridge the gap?
Yeah, and in Nigeria, for instance, right, the government is really interested in getting to the negotiation table
Hmm.
to solve that problem. Um, I think it's the problem is multi-pronged. So just beyond the regulation and beyond the legislation, which I reckon what you're saying is that, what legislation can be put in place to get the right resources or the right
Hmm.
infrastructure into these institutions and the schools. Um, because education, to a certain degree, depending on how you look at it, has a very long-term return that is
Hmm.
not particularly tangible. When you think about, from a corporate finance perspective, you can see the commercial returns, right? They're
Yeah.
very intangible returns, but they form the bedrock of the development of any nation.
Yeah.
And so you need to continue to educate your kids, your young people, to get them ready for the future of work consistently. And even, corporates, individuals, professionals who are working, right, and even folks who have grown beyond the university level, you still need to continue to educate them. But what that means is that your investment in education needs to be consistent over the long
Hmm.
term. You cannot just make a one-time investment. And there's this example we use in Nigeria where in the 70s to the 80s to the mid 90s, education was fantastic. And all of a
Mm.
sudden it just went downhill from there because there was no reinvestment in infrastructure, etc. So to, regulators and individuals who, put together these types of legislation, the feedback would be to think about sustainable investment in education. The sort isn't for it to be a one-time investment that is significant. The sort is for it to be consistent and for it to be
Hmm.
sustainable. So designing, whether it's a fund, designing a system that allows for consistent investment in education, which has, visible impact. So whether it's infrastructure, investment in classrooms, etc., all those are important. And, that's the guidance that I would give to regulators or legislators.
Right. I could not agree more. It is a long game. And, we've over the years seen a lot of evolution in what, at least in the community I live in, around education and how it's delivered, right? As I said, many years ago, it was you went to your school, you did your thing, and you went home. But now there's like online learning, there's distance learning, there's homeschooling. Like at least I was even reading this article recently that talked about charter schools. And charter schools are schools that focus on not just, your core subjects, the must-haves, but really allow kids to like explore those other things, such as like music and dance and art and STEM programs. And, when you talk about sustainable investment, I think it also means that like not only does it have to be sustainable, but it also has to be like, how do you keep kids engaged? Right? That's
Mm,
that's that's part of it because not all kids learn the same way.
right. Yeah.
Um, so if you think about back in the day when you were learning, like how fun was it to sit for an hour or hour and a half and read some dry textbook and like be fully engaged in something that happened like so far like in the past, or you couldn't figure out how it related to your experience. And I think that maybe that's one of the changes that needs to occur with education is like how do you engage kids more so that they actually want to learn and that they want to be there, right? Because is that a problem as well in Nigeria where, kids get up to post-secondary and then they're just off in the workforce and, education's for the birds kind of thing? Or do Nigerian youth feel like, no, I got to get those degrees?
And indeed, to the point that you made earlier on, we're seeing quite an influx of a number of charter schools even into
Hmm.
Nigeria, right? There's some
Yeah.
investments that we're seeing with charter schools in Nigeria, but indeed that's the case, right? We have instances where students are not necessarily getting the best learning practices, and it goes back to the types of investments you're making in your people, the teachers that you have, and it goes back to the quality of the teachers, the quality of teachers, I hear these days, is no longer what it used to be before,
Mm-hmm.
in Nigeria, right? And that's not necessarily because the opportunities are not presented to them, right? It's just that investment in training, in, helping them understand how to deal with kids, for instance, right? How to engage kids, the multiple ways that you could take, in teaching a kid. Some of those are not consistent. Again, you don't have those investments in training and retraining or exposure to best practices across the world because it's beyond the markets that you operate in, right? It's also what learnings are you able to gain from other world-class institutions, right? Who teach, schools that teach. So, yes, people is a big issue. The faculty that teach these kids, it's a big issue. The infrastructure in place also is a big issue that we see. And what curriculum as well is something that we
Mm-hmm.
don't talk about often.
Yeah.
For in tertiary education, for instance, right? And I find with post-secondary education, some curriculum become outdated. And in
Mm-hmm.
the world of AI, right, artificial intelligence, where a lot of, it's a fast-moving world. Even in the corporate sector where you're literally at the cutting edge of the work that you do, it's still fast changing. Now,
Yeah.
think about the education sector where you're sort of teaching, these students, probably work that has been done to help them understand concepts and principles. If you're not, revamping your curriculum,
Yeah.
updating it consistently, you find that you're teaching, the kids and you're teaching the students, right, work that is no longer relevant or, information that is no longer useful.
I love it. I'm loving this conversation. It's so juicy, but we have to go to break, B. So when we're back, we will continue to talk about leadership and education. And you said my favorite word, AI, or I guess two letters. We will be right back.
Leadership isn't reserved for CEOs or world leaders. It's something each of us is called to embody in our own lives. But how do you awaken that inner leader with clarity and confidence? On Sacred Leadership with intuitive business coach Sherisse Alexander, you'll discover powerful tools and spiritual insights to align your words, actions, and outcomes. Tune in every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, 9 Mountain, and 8 Pacific, right here on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is Sacred Leadership with Sherisse Alexander. To participate in the program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also send an email to Sherisse@pavitraleadership.com. Now back to the program.
Welcome back to Sacred Leadership with Sherisse. I am joined here today by Biyi Akinnaanu, and we are speaking about finding internal alignment in a dynamic environment. And Biyi and I have been spending actually the better part of the discussion today talking about leadership, but a lot in the context of education. So we've really touched on education a lot in the first and second segment of today's show. And I'm going to pivot just a little bit because I'm curious. You've already said you're really passionate about education, and you and I have dialogued a lot about how, you know, the system, and I think the system, not just in Nigeria, I think we're both saying that the system globally is being really challenged right now. And leaders really needing to find a way to make it sustainable, make it accessible. That's the other thing, right? Making it accessible and also making it engaging. And so the question I would pose to you is, given that you're so passionate about it, and I think that in parts of your life you are actively involved in education and mentorship, how do you find alignment with, your values and your core, like what you're passionate about, in an environment that makes it really, really challenging? And again, that's not specific to Nigeria, that's the globe, because the globe, I think, is challenged by education right now. How do you do that?
There's this favorite, not a favorite word, but there's this word, called, well, a twin word, tone deaf. And I think in Nigeria, you need to be environment deaf to get anything done. If you say you're passionate about anything, right, the country is going to test you and it's
Yeah.
going to test the boundaries of that passion and whether you truly care about it. The problems, they just innumerable. I think is the best way to describe it.
Mhm.
Whether it's with on a day-to-day basis, whether it's with regulators. We talked about the regulators earlier on, right? And how they form such a huge piece, they can impact the sector that you operate in, for
Mhm.
instance, right? And determine the types of outcomes that you see. In education, for instance, in Nigeria, they set the types of standards that you can have, the types of academic standards for entering to university, for instance, right? And just because of that, effectively means that they are impacting the quality of students that come into institutions and effectively the quality of students that those institutions can produce. And so there's just a huge impact that they have from their end. And it can make your work frustrating because
Mhm.
one example that I mentioned at some point in time to I think it was you, Sherisse, I can't
Mhm.
remember, where the minimum entry requirement into a university was dropped. And
Yeah.
the impact was just clear that yes, just like you said, right, there's an import to make education accessible, but you shouldn't do that at the detriment of quality, right? There
Agreed.
should be a way to think about making the minimum entry requirements, right, at a high standard, and then focusing on the pipeline that gets into those institutions by, whether it's teaching them. Because if you're having to lower the standard so that you can get more people into universities, it means that the secondary education that you're providing or the primary education that you're providing, there's something fundamentally wrong with it.
Mhm.
And so that can be frustrating because if you work in that sector, you then wonder, we're trying to produce quality output, but you're saying that, the entry requirements, right, is going to be lower than what it is that we're used to. So I go back again to, how the country, the continent will test how passionate about, the sector that you say you're interested in. And for me, what really brings it home is that we are at a point in our own growth story where everything needs to be built.
Yeah.
And the types of experiences, right, the types of learnings, the types of networks, the type of places that we've been to, I sort of feel a huge sense of responsibility to
Yeah.
be able to give back in my own way. I talked about a sense of urgency earlier on, right? It's that sense of urgency that overwhelms me to say, yes, I'm in corporate finance and I've done corporate finance, for the last, 10 years, right? But education is such a big sector that needs some type of impact and needs some type of change. I want to contribute to that. And so if you don't have a sense of responsibility, right, in Nigeria, to understand that what you need to see, you have to build it,
Yeah.
right? You're not gonna get anywhere. And for me, that's how I find the internal alignment that if I do care about this and I complain about it, I have to put in work to see the outcome that I need.
Enter cliche, be the change you want to see.
Yeah.
But you're right. And I remember the day that I talked to you because you were really fired up about it. Because at the end of the day, when we had that conversation, it's really recognizing that you're handicapping your youth. You think you're helping them, but you're handicapping them because you're not you're not necessarily equipping them with the resources, and I'm talking about knowledge, in order to realistically compete. Because let's face it, that's what it is. Once you graduate, you got to go find a job, and you're in competition with however many hundred other million youths there are that are looking for jobs.
Globally.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And then there's the global stage, right? I was just talking about Nigeria, but I mean, if we expand that to the continent and then the globe, and then of course there's this leaving syndrome, the Japa syndrome that
That person
happens,
syndrome.
right? So it just makes it so much more difficult for your future to be able to really be effective and solve the challenges here at home, or want to solve the challenges here at home. So, um, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more about the tone deaf piece. It's like you really just kind of got to put on the blinders, look up every now and again just to make sure that everything's okay, but stay real focused on where it is that you're going. So, if you had to like take a step back and consider leaders, either locally, as in Nigeria, the continent, or even globally, where you think that they're really doing a great job in terms of alignment. I was going to use the word right, but what I mean is alignment, because there's something that you said, and it really reminded me of the collective or community. So to me, a really great leader, yes, can make tough decisions, et cetera, has their core values, knows what they are, can really, and those are where the challenging decisions come in, right? When they're sometimes in contradiction with what is in the good of the collective. Is there anyone that you can think of, country or institution or individual, where they're nailing it, where they are in alignment and we can see that?
Yes, I think a few come to mind, but I'd probably talk about Matt Tilliard, who is a partner at Cross Boundary. And
Mm,
when they started the institution, they thought about it, as solving a huge energy problem on the African continent, either by providing energy access to individuals, to corporates who need it, etc. But
yeah.
they've effectively evolved that platform to, or that company, to a platform that serves multiple sectors that are focused on impact.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, right, that's finding, using internal alignment, right, to solve a problem at a platform level where you're taking the goals that you believe in, right? You're finding, and I go back to, this 3+1 equation that I mentioned earlier on: friendship, integrity, professionalism, and a
Yeah.
sense of urgency. You're taking these three things, right? And you're finding people with similar goals, individuals with a commonality around, whether it's renewable energy that they focus on or interested in, or whether it's education, or whether it's social impact, or whether it's natural habitats, about preserving our habitats, and allowing them to run with these goals. I think from a leadership perspective, from leadership leaders that I admire, I think Matt Tilliard, in how he's shown leadership across boundary, I find that exciting. And it's a number of partners, right? I think there are about 3 or 4 partners.
Mm-hmm.
There's Peter Gilbert across boundary as well too. But how they've really been able to find a crop of professionals to drive change across emerging markets on
Mm-hmm.
different platforms. So they started out with a focus on renewable energy, but now they've evolved into, natural or nature. Now they're focused on nature conservation and raising capital to finance initiatives in that pace. Now they've moved into education, right? And they started with affordable housing for students, right? Which goes back to the infrastructure problem, right? If you can eat, if you can find somewhere good to live, you
Yeah.
cannot learn. There's no
Mm-hmm.
way to second guess that. And so for me, just a leader that thinks at a platform level, right?
Yeah.
Starting at one thing, but evolving into other areas that you can attract the right type of people to drive growth in those areas. For me, those are leaders that I think, are able to use their own internal alignment, right? And then reflect that in others, because it's not just about what you can do and how well you
Mm-hmm.
connect with your mission, right? But how well you can attract the right people and give them that platform, or that starting point, so that they can go pursue the other things that matter and contribute to the overall part of the growth that we want to see on the continent or in emerging markets generally.
And I love that approach, right? Where, because really what you're talking about is I would call it his ability to be very like a visionary, because you're looking at all of the SDG goals, right? Like you're not just looking at one very myopically, you're understanding that they all connect, hence the reason they're SDG goals, right? It's like if you're hungry, let's face it, you can't learn. If you
Yeah.
don't have a good sleep or clean water or power, like, they're all important in their own way. So I love a platform that can really take one thing and pivot and recognize that, like, there's so many other things that need to be addressed, right? Not just like my one little corner. So thank you for high about finding alignment in a
Leadership
very
isn't reserved for
dynamic
CEOs or
environment.
world leaders. It's something each of us is called to embody in our own lives. But how do you awaken that inner leader with clarity and confidence? On Sacred Leadership with intuitive business coach Sherisse Alexander, you'll discover powerful tools and spiritual insights to align your words, actions, and outcomes. Tune in every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, 9 Mountain, and 8 Pacific, right here on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is Sacred Leadership with Sherisse Alexander. To participate in the program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also send an email to Sherisse@pavitraleadership.com. Now back to the program.
Welcome, welcome, welcome back. This is Sherisse Alexander on the Inspired Choices Network, and I am joined here today by Biyi, where we are talking about finding internal alignment when your external world is very, very dynamic. So we've talked a lot today about education, and right before we went to commercial, we were chatting about a leader that B could identify that was really nailing the whole alignment piece, internal values in an external or very dynamic external world. So B, if you had to identify three qualities that leaders should be mindful of in order to be an effective leader, what would you tell them?
It's such a big question. And I think, the response changes from time to time, especially because I've worked with multiple types of leaders, diverse types of leaders over time. But one quality that I've seen to be able to, as a leader, that you must have above everything else, right, is, what I would define as empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And empathy, not to be able to give people a free rein to do whatever it is that they want to do, but just being able to understand and um help others see that you've been where they are, and understand the types of
Mm-hmm.
issues that they go through. Um, is very, very important. And that's why you see sometimes that you find, managers, senior managers who are reporting to senior business leaders, right? They have more respect for individuals who have walked their walk, right? To understand the types of challenges that they go through. So empathy and, empathy itself, right? It comprises a number of things for it to be able to effectively work. So there's trust within that, there's emotional intelligence, that ability to be able to understand this person as an individual and drive them to achieve the goals that they need to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
So empathy is I think is a big one because it means that you understand the people that you work with and you're able to incentivize them to achieve the goals that they need to achieve. The second quality, I'd say is just having servant mindset, a service mindset, if you will, and not just going on the back. And the leaders that I've seen to be super different, right, are leaders that take this type of perspective where it's not just because they're CEO, that they're
Mm-hmm.
doing this. You can see the passion in the work that they do, right? They can go as strategic as you want them to go. Obviously they operate at board levels, at industry level where they're leading industry associations, etc. But also, if you want to get into the granularity of the work that they do, they understand what makes the business tick, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what that means is that, they're able to define for each individual, right, what it is that needs to get done, at any point in time. And I think, that is also very, very important. Just, knowing, what everyone is focused on and helping them, getting the best out of them, as a leader. So just having that service mindset, because it changes the framing. You no longer use
Yeah.
authority, but you're more influencing. And influence is more powerful because you hand over, responsibility to the folks that work with you, and you expect them to deliver beyond your expectations now. What that means is that you're effectively training them to be what you are,
Hmm.
if they can get into that type of mindset and behavior. And the third quality that I would say, so I talked about empathy, having a servant mindset or a service mindset. The third one would be, can I put two in one or just one?
You can keep going for a few minutes.
The third one I would say for leadership, right, is just having a clear sense of where you're headed. You
Yeah.
know, that's the vision. You
Yeah.
need to always have that completely thought out, 10
Yeah.
steps ahead of everyone, because who's going to follow someone who does not know where they're going to. So
Yeah, for
those are the
sure.
three qualities that I would say leaders should have.
The what you just said there really resonates with me, and specifically the service piece, right? Because if we look at this, for a moment, just take a step back and just frame it in the sense that we are all here in servitude to the collective meaning the globe, every single individual on it. So, when I'm working with my people, I say to them often, like, I'm here to help you. I want you to find what lights a fire in your belly, right? Like, yeah, spreadsheets are great, financial models, they're all great. They're fantastic. Good job, B. But really, what makes you really, really, what gets you out of bed in the morning? And if I can
Yeah.
help you find that, then you'll be excited to be here. If I can help you find that joyful peace that like really lights you up in the morning. We're just about near the end of our time here today, B. But this is going to be a doozy, so I might have to have you come back. But I had Alexandra join us on a previous episode, and we were talking about capital, of course. Do you
Mm.
think that the leadership qualities are any different? And I mean specific to the continent, because she brought up well, let me just leave it there. Do you think that the qualities are any different when we're looking at capital and fundraising and aligning internal values, leaders, and now the investor in that piece? One
Yeah.
thing. Give me one
One
value that you think like just one.
that brings the investor, the
Yeah.
continent and
Yeah.
internal values into
Yeah.
one
That you
thing.
must have alignment on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough one to fit into one word. But if there's a word to define that, is I'd say the ability to help people see the future. And that's just
Yeah.
storytelling, I think is
Yeah.
the best way I would capture it. You must be able to tell stories, because if you see the individuals that have really pushed the boundaries of civilization, the ability to tell stories of where we're going and paint a picture of the future has really been critical to those outcomes. Because once you set the story and you set the goals and you tell it well and you're able to capture hearts, you will find all the muscle to build it out. And
Hmm.
that's the word that would define that. Storytelling.
I don't think I've ever heard you say that. But you're so right because if you think about, I mean, you and I obviously work together. And I say to folks often, especially when it's from a sharing what it is that we do perspective, yes, solar panels are great. I won't say great for the environment. We'll say they reduce, CO2 emissions. Let's say it like that. And they have their positives for the environment and the community. However, at the same time, people got to be able to identify with the people and what their stories are. So that's the individual people on the inside. That's the communities that we work in. That's the clients and the off takers and so on and so forth. So On that note, thank you so much, Bee, for joining me today and sharing your perspective on education, leadership, and finding alignment in a dynamic environment. For the viewers and listeners, until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Sacred Leadership Show. Sherisse returns Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, 9 Mountain, and 8 Pacific on the InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. Until then, continue taking small steps today to be a leader in your life for the collective.